Let's start by dismantling one of the biggest myths people carry into narcissistic relationships, the idea that strength, confidence, or dominance is what protects you. We're taught that if you're bold enough, loud enough, or tough enough, no one can break you. And that belief feels comforting. It feels empowering. But in the context of narcissism, it's dangerously misleading. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: narcissists are not afraid of strong people. They are activated by them. When you show up confident, assertive, and unafraid to challenge, the narcissist doesn't retreat. They study you. They catalog your reactions. They learn exactly where your pride lives, where your values are, where your sense of justice sits, and then they press right there. Strength doesn't intimidate a narcissist. It gives them a worthy opponent. And they love opponents, because opponents give them drama, engagement, and emotional energy. Think about it. The strong, outspoken person argues back. They explain. They defend. They confront inconsistencies. They believe that clarity will fix confusion, that truth will correct distortion. And that makes perfect sense in healthy relationships. But narcissistic dynamics are not about truth. They're about control. So every argument becomes a stage. Every confrontation becomes fuel. Every display of strength becomes an invitation. This is why so many capable, intelligent, confident people find themselves shocked by how deeply damaged they feel after these relationships. They think, I'm not weak. I've handled harder things than this. And that's exactly why it hurts so much. Because they assumed their usual tools, logic, courage, resilience, would work here too. And they don't. The narcissist escalates when challenged. They don't self-reflect, they retaliate, they don't collaborate, they dominate. So the stronger you push, the more sophisticated the manipulation becomes. The louder you get, the quieter and more covert they become. And suddenly, you're not just in a disagreement, you're in psychological warfare. And here's another hard truth. Strength often keeps people in the relationship longer. Strong people pride themselves on endurance. They think leaving equals failure. They believe that if they just try harder, communicate better, stay calmer, stay firmer, eventually the other person will change. That belief traps them, not because they're naive, but because they're resilient. And resilience, in this context, gets exploited. The narcissist reads that resilience as tolerance. They read persistence as permission. They assume you'll stay because you always have, and every time you bounce back, every time you forgive, every time you stand your ground and remain present, you reinforce the idea that no matter how far they go, you'll still be there. Strength becomes predictability, and predictability becomes leverage. This is why the survivor is not the loudest person in the room. It's not the most dominant personality. It's not the one who wins arguments. Because winning arguments with a narcissist doesn't exist. There is only engagement. And engagement always costs you something. Hat actually destabilizes a narcissist is not power displays, but emotional neutrality. Not confrontation, but non-participation. Not dominance, but disengagement. And that feels counterintuitive, especially if you've built your identity around being strong, capable, and unbreakable. This isn't about becoming passive. It's about becoming strategic. It's about recognizing that some battles aren't lost because you weren't strong enough. They're lost because you shouldn't have been fighting them at all. And when people hear this, there's often grief. Because it means letting go of a heroic self-image. It means accepting that your strength didn't fail you. The context betrayed it. And that's a painful realization. But it's also freeing. Because once you stop trying to overpower a narcissist, can start protecting yourself. The moment you realize that survival doesn't require proving anything, explaining anything, or defeating anyone, that's the moment the dynamic begins to lose its grip on you. And that's the real shift. Survival doesn't come from being stronger than the narcissist, it comes from no longer needing to be. Once the myth of strength starts to crack, another deeply cherished belief tends to fall right behind it. The idea that empathy, loyalty, and emotional depth will somehow save the relationship. Many people come into narcissistic dynamics believing that if they can just love harder, understand more, stay patient, and remain committed, the chaos will eventually settle. That compassion will soften the edges, that loyalty will be recognized, and that emotional insight will create connection. But narcissistic relationships don't reward empathy. They consume it. Highly empathetic people often become the most deeply entangled, not because they lack awareness, but because they see potential everywhere. They notice the pain behind the behavior. They sense the insecurity beneath the arrogance. They tell themselves, if I can just show them consistency, they'll feel safe enough to change. And again, that makes sense in healthy relationships. Empathy is a healing force when both people are capable of self-reflection. But narcissism breaks that equation. A narcissist doesn't experience empathy as a bridge, they experience it as access. When you're empathetic, you explain their behavior for them. You soften their accountability. You fill in emotional gaps they have no intention of addressing. You absorb blame that doesn't belong to you. And because you can imagine how painful shame might feel to them, you work around it. You adjust your tone. You shrink your needs. You delay hard conversations, not because you're afraid, but because you're kind. And kindness becomes the currency of manipulation. Loyalty deepens the trap even further. Loyal PE. Opal don't leave when things get hard. They double down. They remember the good moments. They believe in history. They tell themselves that walking away would erase everything they invested. Narcissists understand this instinctively. They create cycles of affection and withdrawal, reward and punishment that bind loyalty tighter each time. You're not staying because things are good. You're staying because you hope they will be again. And hope is a powerful tether. Empathetic, loyal people often feel a moral responsibility to stay. They fear being like everyone else who abandoned the narcissist. They don't want to become another story the narcissist tells about betrayal. So they endure more than they should, convincing themselves that leaving would be cruel, selfish, or premature. Meanwhile, the narcissist reframes your loyalty as entitlement. They expect it, they exploit it, and over time, they resent you for it. This is one of the cruel paradoxes of narcissistic relationships. The very traits that make you a good partner, friend, or family member are the traits that get weaponized against you. Your empathy becomes a lever for guilt. Your loyalty becomes a reason they never have to change. Your emotional insight becomes a roadmap to your vulnerabilities. And then something quiet but devastating happens. You begin to doubt yourself. You start wondering if your empathy is actually weakness, if your loyalty is actually foolishness, if your emotional depth is the problem. And that's not just painful, it's identity shaking, because these traits are not behaviors you can switch off. They are values you live by. But survival requires a hard reframe. Empathy without boundaries is not compassion, it's self-erasure. Empathy does not obligate you to stay in harm. Loyalty does not require tolerating abuse. Understanding someone's pain does not mean sacrificing your own well-being to accommodate it. Those are not moral victories. They are slow losses. The person who survives. A narcissist doesn't lose empathy, they redirect it. They stop pouring it into a bottomless well and start offering it inward. They learn that compassion includes themselves. That loyalty must be reciprocal. That emotional depth is meant for connection, not self-destruction. And this is where people often feel guilt. Because choosing yourself can feel like betrayal when you've been trained to prioritize others' pain over your own. But survival isn't betrayal. It's clarity. It's recognizing that love should not require you to disappear. The moment you stop trying to save someone who is invested in staying the same, you create space to save yourself. And that's when empathy finally becomes strength again. When it includes you, after people begin to loosen their grip on the idea that strength or empathy will save them, there's often a moment of confusion. If being powerful doesn't work and being loving doesn't work, then what does? And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume the survivor must be emotionally cold, distant, or detached in a harsh, uncaring way. That survival means becoming unfeeling, that you have to shut down your heart to get through it. That, not what actually happens. The person who survives a narcissist is not emotionally cold. They are emotionally regulated, and there is a world of difference between those two states. Emotional coldness is numbness. It's dissociation. It's shutting down because you're overwhelmed or depleted. Emotional regulation, on the other hand, is choice. It's the ability to feel emotions without being ruled by them. It's knowing what you feel, but not handing those feelings to someone who will use them against you. Narcissists feed on emotional intensity. Anger, tears, explanations, desperation, passion. These are not deterrents. They are nourishment. Every big reaction confirms significance. Every emotional outpouring reassures them that they still have power. So the moment you start managing your emotional output, the entire dynamic begins to shift. And this is incredibly uncomfortable at first, especially for people who value openness and authenticity. It can feel fake. It can feel wrong. You might think, I shouldn't have to hold myself back like this. And in a healthy relationship, you wouldn't. But again, this isn't about what should work. It's about what does. The survivor leer. NS to stop over-explaining. They stop defending their reality to someone committed to distorting it. They stop narrating their pain in the hope that it will finally be understood. Not because they don't feel it, but because they've learned that expression in this context leads to exploitation. Instead of reacting immediately, they pause. They observe, they give themselves time to respond rather than reflexively engaging. They recognize bait when it's offered and choose not to take it. And this restraint isn't weakness, it's mastery. It takes far more strength to stay grounded than to explode. One of the hardest parts of this shift is grieving how much emotional labor you've been doing. Many people don't realize until much later how often they were managing the narcissist's moods, soothing their ego, anticipating their reactions, and cleaning up emotional chaos that wasn't theirs to fix. Emotional regulation begins when you stop doing that work. You stop matching their intensity. You stop mirroring their volatility. You stop trying to bring calm into a system that thrives on disruption. And that can feel unsettling, because chaos had become familiar. Calm feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. It just means new. This regulated stance also protects your sense of self. When you're constantly emotionally reactive, you're constantly off balance. You're always responding, never leading. Regulation puts you back in your own body, in your own timing, in your own reality. You begin to notice how much clearer things look when you're not flooded by emotion. And Nothing else happens that surprises many people. The narcissist often becomes more erratic. Because when the emotional supply diminishes, they feel it. They may escalate. They may provoke. They may accuse you of being distant, uncaring, or changed. And in a way, you have changed, but not for the worse. You've changed in the direction of self-protection. This is where many people doubt themselves. They worry they're becoming someone they don't like. But regulation doesn't erase compassion. It creates boundaries around it. It ensures that your emotions are shared with people who can hold them responsibly. The survivor doesn't stop feeling, they stop leaking. They learn that not every emotion needs to be expressed in the moment, that not every thought needs to be spoken, that silence can be stabilizing, that restraint can be empowering, and that peace is not something you negotiate with a narcissist. It's something you reclaim internally. Emotional regulation is not shutting down, it's waking up. And the moment you stop feeding chaos with your feelings is the moment your freedom quietly begins. As emotional regulation starts to take hold, something else begins to shift, your relations. Hip with being understood. For a long time, many people stay trapped in narcissistic dynamics because they believe that if they can just explain themselves clearly enough, compassionately enough, or logically enough, the other person will finally get it. That the misunderstanding is the problem, that clarity will lead to accountability, that if the narcissist truly understood your pain, they wow. Stop causing it. But here's the hard reality. Narcissists don't fail to understand. You fail to accept that understanding was never the goal. Narcissistic relationships are not built on confusion. They're built on reinterpretation. Your words are not misheard. They're reshaped. Your feelings are not unclear. They're reframed. Every explanation you offer becomes material, something to twist, minimize, deny, or use later. And the more earnestly you try to be understood, the more power you hand over. This is why survivors stop trying to explain themselves, not because they don't deserve to be heard, but because they recognize who they're talking to. They understand that clarity does not lead to resolution in narcissistic systems, it leads to vulnerability. Every time you open up hoping or empathy, you're giving someone information who has already shown you they don't handle it with care. At some point, something clicks. You realize you're not having conversations, you're participating in performances. You're laying out evidence, emotions, and lived experience and watching it be dismissed, debated, or distorted in real time. And that realization is painful, because it means that the connection you were striving for may not be possible, but it's also liberating. The survivor shifts from seeking understanding to prioritizing clarity. And clarity is different. Clarity is internal. It doesn't require agreement. It doesn't require validation. It's grounded in facts, patterns, and lived experience. It's knowing what's happening even if the other person denies it. T's trusting your perception even when someone insists you're wrong. This is where documentation, distance, and boundaries begin to matter more than dialogue. Instead of arguing about intent, survivors look at impact. Instead of debating individual incidents, they notice patterns. Instead of asking, why don't they understand me? They ask, what does this behavior consistently show me? That shift changes everything. When you stop needing the narcissist to understand your pain, you stop putting your pain on trial. You stop arguing your own reality into exhaustion. You stop chasing closure from someone who benefits from keeping things unresolved. And slowly, your energy returns to you. Many people struggle with guilt at this stage. They worry they're giving up too soon. They fear being unfair. They wonder if they're shutting down communication. But clarity is not cruelty. It's discernment. It's realizing that endless explanation is not emotional maturity. It's emotional depletion. And here's something important. Narcissists often accuse survivors of being rigid, closed off, or unwilling to talk once this shift happens. That accusation can sting, especially if you value communication. But refusing to participate in distortion is not avoidance. It's self-respect. The survivor understands that not every relationship is a place where truth can live safely, and that doesn't mean truth disappears. It means you protect it. You share it selectively. You anchor it internally rather than offering it up for debate. This is also where people stop asking the narcissist to validate their feelings. They stop looking for apologies that never come, accountability that never sticks, or insight that never lasts. They accept that some people are not emotionally equipped to meet them where they are, and no amount of explanation will change that. Clarity becomes quieter, stronger, less dramatic. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to win the narrative. You don't need to be believed by the person who harmed you in order to heal from the harm. And that's a profound turning point, because the moment you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your voice. And clarity, once reclaimed, no longer asks for permission to exist. Once clarity replaces explanation, another realization quietly settles in, and this one can be deeply unsettling. You begin to see that this relationship was never something you could fix, negotiate, or resolve, that there was no version of the right words, the right timing, or the right behavior that would suddenly make it healthy. And that's when many people instinctively shift into a new goal, winning. Winning the argument, winning the truth, winning the moral high ground, winning the narrative. But survival doesn't come from winning. It comes from disengaging. Narcissistic relationships are not disagreements waiting to be resolved. They are systems designed to keep you engaged. Every argument, every confrontation, every attempt to set the record straight keeps the system alive. And the narcissist doesn't need to win every time, they just need the game to continue. As long as you're participating, they're in control. This is one of the hardest truths for people to accept, especially those who value justice, fairness, and accountability. Walking away can feel like surrender. It can feel like letting them get away with it. It can feel deeply unsatisfying because there's no final verdict. No acknowledgement, no apology that validates your experience. But disengagement is not defeat. It's recognition. The survivor realizes that the battlefield itself is the problem, that staying engaged, even with good intentions, comes at a cost that keeps compounding over time. Emotional exhaustion, self-doubt, hypervigilance, a shrinking sense of self. None of that shows up all at once. It accumulates slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you don't recognize who you've become. Disengagement begins when you stop reacting to every provocation, when you stop correcting every lie, when you stop responding to bait disguised as conversation. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you choose when speaking actually serves you. And more often than not, silence does more to protect your peace than any perfectly crafted response ever could. This is where people often worry they're being passive. They're not. Passivity is giving up your agency. Disengagement is reclaiming it. You're deciding where your energy goes. You're deciding what deserves your attention. You're deciding that your nervous system matters more than proving a point. And here's something important. Narcissists tend to escalate when they sense disengagement. They may provoke harder, guilt louder, accuse more intensely. They want you back in the ring. They want the familiar rhythm of conflict and reconciliation. And this is where many people get pulled back in, mistaking escalation for importance. But escalation is not connection. It's desperation. The survivor learns to tolerate the discomfort of not respo, to sit with the urge to explain, defend, or correct, and let it pass. This takes practice. It goes against years of conditioning that told you resolution comes from talking things through. But some relationships are not meant to be talked through. They're meant to be stepped away from. Disengagement also allows something else to happen, perspective. When you're no longer in constant reactio mode, you start seeing patterns more clearly. You notice how predictable the cycles are, how familiar the tactics feel, how little actually changes, no matter how many conversations you've had. And that clarity strengthens your resolve. This is why survivors often say the real healing didn't begin until they stopped trying to get closure from the narcissist. Closure doesn't come from the other person. It comes from deciding you've had enough information, from accepting what is rather than waiting for what should have been. You don't need to convince someone they hurt you in order to stop letting them hurt you. Disengagement is not dramatic. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require permission. It's the steady internal decision to step out of a dynamic that costs you more than it gives, and that decision, made consistently, calmly, and without needing to win, is where survival truly begins. Because the moment you stop fighting to be right is the moment you finally choose to be free. By the time someone reaches this stage, they've already let go of so many illusions. They've stopped trying to overpower the narcissist, stopped trying to love them into change, stopped managing emotions for both people, stopped explaining themselves into exhaustion, and stopped fighting battles that were never meant to be won. And what's left, once all of that falls away, is something both fragile and powerful: self-trust. This is the point where survival truly becomes possible. Narcissistic relationships erode self-trust slowly, not through one dramatic betrayal, but rough thousands of small moments of doubt. You're told you're too sensitive, that you misunderstood, that you're remembering it wrong, that your expectations are unreasonable. And because you're thoughtful, introspective, and willing to self-reflect, you consider the possibility that they might be right. Over time, that habit of self-questioning becomes automatic. You stop checking in with your BO. You stop honoring discomfort. You start outsourcing your reality. The survivor reverses that process. Radical self-trust doesn't mean arrogance or certainty about everything. It means believing yourself when something feels off, even if you can't articulate why yet. It means listening to the quiet signals your body has been sending all along. The tension, the dread, the exhaustion, the sense of shrinking. Those signals were never the problem. They were information. For many people, this is the most uncomfortable shift of all, because trusting yourself often means disappointing someone else. It means acting without approval. It means making decisions that won't be understood, validated, or supported by the person you're leaving behind. And if you've been conditioned to seek harmony, hat can feel almost unbearable. But survival requires choosing yourself without consensus. The survivor stops asking, "Am I allowed to feel this way?" and starts asking, "What is this feeling telling me?" They stop waiting for proof that something is wrong and start accepting patterns as evidence. They stop needing the narcissist to confirm reality because they've learned that confirmation will never come. This kind of self-trust is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It simply acts. And this is where many people experience grief. Because trusting yourself often means acknowledging how long you didn't. It means seeing the moments you ignored your instincts to preserve the relationship. It means accepting that the red flags were there and you explained them away. That realization can be painful. But it's also the doorway to compassion for yourself. Radical self-trust isn't about blaming your past self. It's about honoring the fact that you survived with the tools you had at the time, and now you're choosing different ones. As self-trust strengthens, approval loses its grip. You no longer need to be seen as reasonable, fair, or kind by someone who consistently harmed you. You no longer need to manage their perception of you. You understand that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of being free. This is ALS. Where boundaries stop feeling like punishments and start feeling like protection. You don't set them to change the narcissist. You set them to anchor yourself. And if those boundaries are ignored, you don't debate them. You act, because trust in yourself means trusting your follow-through. The survivor doesn't wait for the narcissist to become safe. They accept that safety comes from within and from distance. They choose environments where their nervous system can rest, where they don't have to be hypervigilant, where they're not constantly scanning for emotional shifts or hidden meanings. And perhaps most importantly, they stop negotiating with their own limits. Radical self-trust is not loud confidence. It's calm alignment. It's knowing what you will and will not tolerate and honor in. Not without apology. It's choosing peace over potential, reality over hope, and yourself over the version of the relationship you kept trying to save. This is why only one type of person truly survives a narcissist. Not the strongest, not the kindest, not the most patient, but the one who finally believes themselves and acts on it. Because the moment you trust yourself more than you fear losing them, the narcissist loses all power.